23 suspects could face criminal charges over the Hillsborough tragedy. Offences include manslaughter by gross negligence and perverting the course of justice. Families of the 96 fans who died that day welcome the decision.
It sends a message out to organisations and people who believe they are above the law that no, you're not. And, you know, eventually Joe Public is going to come and call you to account.
Tonight we speak exclusively to the police officer in charge on the day of the disaster. Also tonight, the British spy at the centre of the controversial dossier on Donald Trump. It's not just snow, now a warning for gales, floods and a tidal surge. And tributes to the former England manager Graham Taylor, who has died. He was 72.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Nearly 28 years after the Hillsborough disaster, criminal charges against 23 suspects moved a significant step closer today. Prosecutors were handed files recommending a number of charges, including manslaughter by gross negligence and perverting the course of justice. It follows two major investigations into the causes of the tragedy and also the actions of police. One of those senior officers, former Match commander David Duckenfield, tonight gave ITV News his reaction, and Damon Green has more.
For 28 years, the families of the 96 have believed their deaths weren't simply a tragedy, they were a crime. From the negligence that caused the crush to the conspiracy to keep that negligence from coming to light. Private prosecutions have tried and failed. Now it seems the families are one step closer to seeing charges come before a criminal court. Trevor Hicks lost two daughters at Hillsborough. He described today's events as a milestone.
It doesn't change what happened to the 96. That's a fact, and that can't be undone. But what it does do, the same as the verdict did, it sends a message out to organisations and people who believe they are above the law that no, you're not. And, you know, eventually Joe Public is going to come and call you to account.
Charges are now being recommended against 23 individuals or organisations. They include allegations of gross negligence, manslaughter and misconduct in a public office, and could be as far-reaching as health and safety failures, safety at sports grounds, perverting the course of public justice and conspiracy. The focus on those who lost control.
It is those who are in charge making the decisions, and out of that we've been able to identify 15 people where there is, in our view, sufficient evidence to go forward to the Crown prosecution for them to consider charges.
David Duckenfield, seen here on the right wearing glasses, was the most senior police officer on duty on the day. He admitted at the inquest he lied. It's not known if he's on the list. Today he told ITV News he hadn't been made aware of the latest developments.
You're informing me of something that I wasn't aware of. I was aware of a rough time scale, but in view of the circumstances, I think it would be inappropriate for me to make any comment at this time. I hope you understand. The situation is this: we are looking into the future, and it wouldn't be appropriate to speculate. So I think what we should say is this: just let's wait and see what the developments are in the future.
How much longer the families of the 96 will have to wait to see charges in a court will now depend on the Crown Prosecution Service and whether they believe the available evidence could result in criminal convictions.
The theory is that the CPS now has to decide what to do. The reality is they're very unlikely to go against the recommendation of investigators from Operation Resolve and the Independent Police Complaints Commission. After all, those three organisations have worked hand in hand on Hillsborough for years now, which is part of the frustration for some of the families. They say they have waited for justice for 28 years. They're now having to wait for another few months for a final decision. As far as they're concerned, the wheels of justice continue to turn very slowly indeed.
Damon Green in Liverpool, thank you. More details have emerged about the former British spy at the centre of the allegations against President-elect Donald Trump. Ex-MI6 agent Christopher Steele is in hiding after he was named as the man behind the dossier which makes lurid claims about Mr Trump. But today his business partner refused to tell ITV News whether their company was indeed involved. Our security editor Rohit Kachru looks at the British connection.
A debate at Cambridge University 2 years ago. In the audience is Christopher Steele, now 52 years old, the father and former MI6 agent who worked in Moscow in the 90s and who, as a private consultant, wrote the Donald Trump dossier last year. He was not at his home tonight. There are claims he left because he's worried for his safety. No sign too at the security consultancy he runs with his business partner, who spoke to ITV News today.
Can you just tell us a little bit about where he is, concerns for his safety?
I think in the light of everything that's happened over the last 24 hours, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to make any comments at the moment on what's happened, whether Orbis has been involved or not. We'll review that situation over the next couple of days.
Orbis is his company, which ITV News has learned was contracted by the FA to research rival bids for the 2018 World Cup, including Russia's. But this is the document that Steele wrote about Donald Trump, alleging the Kremlin interfered with the presidential campaign and that spies had tape of him which could be used for blackmail.
He has a good reputation, and I don't know any reason to suppose that he wouldn't have written in a professional manner. He is, of course, outside the resources of a big system which has the capability to have much greater capability to assess.
Today, the Russian embassy in London hit back, tweeting, "MI6 officers are never X," briefing both ways against Russia and the US president. Perhaps it's not just secrets that are less safe than they were, so are the spies. Christopher Steele's private work was never meant to be made public. He's now exposed to global scrutiny and perhaps to insecurity too. Rohit Katru, ITV News.
Well, today Donald Trump said that the head of US national intelligence had called him to denounce what he called false and fictitious report. But it's still not clear exactly who circulated the dossier and why. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports on the continuing fallout.
The president-elect has dismissed that dossier compiled by the former MI6 officer. Yesterday, Trump describing it as simply fake, and he was withering about the role that American intelligence agencies may have played in leaking it.
Again, I think it's a disgrace that information would be let out.
But today, the nominee to be the next head of the CIA told senators he would be prepared to probe any evidence that linked Trump and his team to the Kremlin.
There are unsubstantiated media reports that there were contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians. If confirmed, will you commit to exploring those questions?
I promise I will pursue the facts wherever they take us. The Central Intelligence Agency has that as one of its singular functions, and you have my commitment that I'll do that.
America's top spies are now distancing themselves from the claims that Trump and his team have a secret relationship with Moscow. But the outgoing head of national intelligence says he also couldn't ignore the reports. He wrote, "The IC, that's the intelligence community, has not made any judgment that the information in this document is reliable, and we did not rely upon it in any way for our conclusions. However, part of our obligation is to ensure that policymakers are provided with the fullest possible picture of any matters that might affect national security." In Moscow, the Kremlin gave its first response to the allegations, saying, perhaps not surprisingly, they did not have compromising material on Donald Trump, or any covert surveillance from when he stayed in the presidential suite at this luxury hotel 3 years ago. But looking ahead, Putin's spokesman said Trump was a leader they could do business with.
We respect his readiness to talk. We respect his readiness to try to understand what is fake and what is not. We respect his readiness to try to solve, to approach problems through dialogue, not through a bold confrontation.
The relationship between Trump and Putin will soon become one of the most closely scrutinized aspects of the new administration. Donald Trump will be, of course, President of the United States, and at that point, America's 17 separate intelligence agencies will report directly to him, and many may expect to be purged amid these ongoing recriminations.
OK, Robert Moore in Washington, thank you. Well, back home, Britain is getting its first real taste of winter, with predictions of up to 8 inches of snow and strong tidal surges, prompting troops to be on standby. Well, the Met Office has tonight issued severe weather warnings for much of the UK, with snow making way for freezing conditions and gale force winds. Our Wales correspondent Rupert Evelyn is in the Brecon Beacons tonight. It's looking cold where you are, Rupert.
It is indeed. Conditions here are fairly benign right now, but the temperature has plummeted a great deal from earlier on today when we witnessed a fair amount of snow, and it's, I think, also fair to say that probably not quite as much as was expected. That said, an awful lot of preparation work has been done by the various authorities to make sure that the routes and that everything that is needed to keep going is kept going. And I think there were fair people out and about enjoying today's weather as well, not just here in Wales, but up in Scotland and indeed across the country. It may not have delivered what people expected, but there was an opportunity to get out and enjoy certainly this part of today's weather.
But Rupert, it's not just snow and ice, is it? I mean, there are fears of gale force winds and even some really quite major flooding in some areas.
In complete contrast to where I'm stood now in Wales, where it's benign, in Essex there is tonight a severe flood warning, well, not just in Essex but from Lincolnshire all the way down that section of East Coast. And in a little village called Jaywick in Essex, residents have been warned that from 7 o'clock tomorrow morning they are going to be evacuated from their homes because of fears of very high tides, very large waves indeed. Jaywick has a history of having some serious problems along the coast. In 1972, a lot of damage was done in that village, and there are very real fears tonight of a repeat of what happened way back then. So as the residents of Jaywick go to bed tonight, they will be wondering what on earth is about to happen tomorrow.
OK, Rupert Evelyn, a very chilly Brecon Beacons, thank you. Still to come on the ITV Evening News, Sir Elton John leads tributes to the former England and Watford manager Graham Taylor, who's died. And
it's only cookery, it's not like life and death.
The MasterChef meltdown, the British boy reduced to tears on Spanish TV. Those stories and more after the break. Join me then. Welcome back. There was more evidence today of the unprecedented pressure facing England's NHS hospitals. The latest figures show they were already under severe strain by November. There was a 42% increase in bed blocking, where patients cannot be discharged into social care. And only 88% of any patients were seen within 4 hours, and that is way below the 95% target. Rebecca Barry spent the day in a hospital in Buckinghamshire to see exactly how staff there are coping.
Afternoon, everybody. Remain on red this afternoon. A&E, could you put updates from A&E, please?
Here at Milton Keynes Hospital, they've only got 3 beds available across all of their wards. Managers gather like this 3 times a day to work out the best way of keeping patients moving through the system.
So that's ward 3, Johnny?
Yeah.
Like most A&E departments, this one missed the target of treating all patients within 4 hours. The chief executive says the pressure is unprecedented.
I've worked in the health service now for 30 years, and this, without question, is the most relentless pressure that we have been under. There are no opportunities to catch your breath. Patients coming through are sicker. There are more patients requiring more and more clinical input.
So the green means that patients are medically fit for discharge, but for whatever reason are unable to go home.
Many patients on this ward are elderly and come in with hip fractures. Delays getting the support they need to go home means they get stuck here, filling beds that other patients need.
You can't make things right. That's a nurse's job, is to try and make things right for people, try and help them get better and go home. So you have this sense of inadequacy sometimes, that you can't help people get home. So it's really upsetting for the patient, it's upsetting for the nurse, and equally upsetting for families as well.
This hospital is coping better than most, but bosses here say that's only down to the goodwill of staff. And with pressures like this non-stop, that won't last forever. Critics argue the NHS needs more funding, but bosses here say the money should go into social care, so patients that don't need to be here can go home. Rebecca Barry, ITV News, Milton Keynes.
Plans to build the world's first tidal lagoon power plant in Swansea Bay have been backed by an independent review. The £1.3 billion project would make use of natural tides to generate electricity. The plans now await government approval. And a major road past Stonehenge will be moved into a 2-mile-long tunnel. It's hoped that'll remove the site and the sound of traffic from the World Heritage Site. Former England players and Sir Elton John have paid tribute to the former England and Watford manager Graham Taylor, who's died at the age of 72. Taylor took Watford into the old First Division and into Europe, but as England boss, he didn't have quite such success. Here's our sports editor, Steve Scott.
The start of an unlikely yet astonishingly successful partnership at Watford. Under chairman Elton John, Graham Taylor took the club from the bottom tier to the top flight in just 5 years. He also led them into Europe and to an FA Cup final. The walkout at Wembley would always be a personal highlight. Today, Sir Elton paid this tribute. He was like a brother to me. We shared an unbreakable bond since we first met. We went on an incredible journey together and it will stay with me forever. This is a sad and dark day. I love you, Graham. I will miss you very much.
I think you meet decent football people, real football people within the game. He was one of those, and he was certainly somebody that had a passion for coaching and wanting to see young English coaches come through.
Taylor's own success as a young coach eventually led to a crack at the England job. But it began to unravel at the European Championships in '92, thanks largely to defeat to Sweden. One tabloid's reaction was cruel but memorable. The pressure built daily, but Taylor survived. A television crew followed him during England's failure to qualify for the '94 World Cup. Against Poland, the cameras captured the iconic phrase that would define his tenure.
Do I not like that?
Defeat to Holland confirmed England's and Taylor's misery.
The referee's got me the sack. Thank him ever so much for that, won't you?
After flirtations with Villa and Watford again, Taylor retired to the stands to become a well-respected pundit. He leaves his wife Rita, 2 daughters, and a huge amount of affection from so many involved in the game he loved.
Tributes there to the former football manager Graham Taylor, whose death was announced today. And finally tonight, the 9-year-old British boy who captured Spanish hearts with his tearful exit from a cookery show. Oscar Jefferson had made it through to the semi-finals of the Spanish version of Junior MasterChef, but he came unstuck when he tried to cook that classic British dish, fish and chips. Sally Lockwood takes up the story.
Oscar Jefferson didn't speak a word of Spanish when his family moved to Spain. But 2 years on, he's cooking on television, competing in a language that isn't his own.
What's the name of your plate?
Porque siempre me hablas en inglés.
Replying he'd rather speak in Spanish, their young British contestant oozed talent and spirit. But when his fish and chips went wrong, it all became a bit too much.
I think I spent too long checking on the oil temperature, so that didn't give me time to batter the fish. My tartar sauce spilt, and my chips were all soggy and horrible.
His grandfather, whose dish he was trying to replicate, offered him some tough love.
It's only cookery. It's not like life and death.
But social media went into meltdown as Oscar stole the hearts of viewers. He's now stopped in the street by fans and can speak to them in either language.
People ask for a selfie and they say, "Hola, ¿quieres hacer un selfie? Eres Jefferson de MasterChef, no?" And I said, yeah.
Oscar took to Twitter in Spanish to thank the show for the unforgettable experience. And yesterday he cooked for the British ambassador in Madrid. He sees a career ahead of him in the kitchen.
A chef, yeah, but if not, probably an astronaut.
But he's got a backup plan if not. Sally Lockwood, ITV News.
Oh, the wonderful Oscar Jefferson. And that is all for now. Tom Bradby's here with news at 10. But from me and all the team here, have a great evening. Bye-bye.